Our live Tuesday in-studio edition. We welcome to our Seneca Falls studios Chris Lajewski, Montezuma Audubon Center. Welcome back.
Great to be with you, Ted.
Let's start with this. One of the things you do at Montezuma and the federal officials do at the National Wildlife Refuge is manage the wetlands habitat. Has that been any different or more difficult in this somewhat drought-conditioned summer?
We have the ability to maintain water levels in all of the marshes across the Montezuma Wetlands Complex because there is an earthen berm that surrounds each and every marsh. And each year we will have the water levels in conjunction with the amount of vegetation that is in a particular marsh. So if there is not enough vegetation, native vegetation growing in that marsh, we would lower that water level to expose the seed that is in the mucky soil in that wetland that will allow it to germinate and produce the native vegetation and the food source that the millions of waterfowl primarily need in order to sustain themselves during the migration and the breeding season. Conversely, if we have too much vegetation, we will increase the water levels. That will, in effect, knock back some of the vegetation because we're looking for a 50-50 balance, 50% open water, 50% vegetation in a hemi-marsh situation. That's the ideal state. And yes, we are at the mercy of Mother Nature, and we do in part restrict water levels at certain times of the year, but because it's been dry, we still have an abundant amount of water in many of the marshes, and that's providing critical habitat for breeding birds such as our least and American bitterns, some of the waterfowl like mallards and wood ducks. And as we go deeper into fall migration, we're going to have that water there for the migratory shorebirds that come on through.
So that vegetation management, that answered my next question, which is why, for example, some years when you drive by the wildlife refuge in 5 and 20, you'll see water right out there by the road, and then sometimes the water's gone and you see the plants. That's in order to stimulate that growth.
Every few years, we will lower water levels if the water's been average or above average. Conversely, we'll increase water levels if it's been a little bit drier. Because the berm is around it, it is a managed ecosystem, and that takes place both on the federal side, the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge down here in Seneca Falls, as well as up on the New York State DEC properties up in Savannah.
Now, it's not quite autumn yet, but the autumn migration is getting underway. We've had this conversation in the past. How much of that is based on weather? How much of it is based on when the sun rises and sets? And how much of it is sort of the internal clock?
Here we are, middle of the summer pretty much, and we're starting to see birds heading south for the winter. That is based on largely the fact that up in the Arctic tundra, where many of these birds go to breed, there isn't enough time for them to try to breed a second time if their first nesting fails. The birds that we're seeing now migrating through are shorebirds. About a dozen species or so have started migrating south already. These are sandpipers, plovers, yellowlegs, and dowitchers. And over the course of this fall migration, we'll see about 24 different species of shorebirds migrating through. So these are largely the adults that were unsuccessful in breeding up in the north. They might have been up in the Arctic. They may have been in the northern fringe of the boreal forest of northern Canada, unsuccessful for whatever reason. But their best bet is to head south for the winter and try again next year. Now, the other thing that triggers migration is the length of daylight hours. And with less and less daylight hours here as we go through August and as we get deeper into September as well, We're going to see fewer daylight hours. That's going to trigger other birds, such as warblers and vireos and songbirds, other songbirds, to head south.
And then when do we see the raptor migration? And tell us about some of the places to watch it, because there's some spectacular opportunities to see hawks and other raptors moving through.
The Lake Ontario shoreline, primarily the southern shoreline, is a great place to see birds of prey, hawks, falcons, eagles, and others. Most of those birds can be seen actually during the spring migration as they're heading northbound. However, there is a smaller fall migratory journey along that southern shoreline. Not too far away, we have a place called Derby Hill, and that's over in Oswego County, about an hour or so drive from the Montezuma Wetlands complex. And that is a habitat and a facility that is managed by our Audubon chapter, the Onondaga Audubon Society. They have an official counter there during the spring migration, and even though that counter isn't there during fall, the public is welcome to be up there and enjoy the incredible number of birds that'll be flying overhead during fall. The other place that we have here in the Finger Lakes region is called Braddock Bay, and that's over by Rochester on the west side of town, in the Greece and Hamlin area. And the reason for these two areas on the southern shore is that the birds of prey typically use thermals, rising columns of air, in order to migrate. And during the daylight hours, these rising columns of air support these birds and get them to fly up into the air. Well, if they were over the water, those thermals dissipate, and it's a very much more difficult for these birds to migrate a tremendous journey, 1,000 to 2,000 miles. So that's why they hug the shoreline, both along the east shore of Lake Ontario and the southern shore.
Does anyone track the flyway paths, and have they changed much over the year, or are they pretty much limited to where the habitat is?
Well, we've drawn the flyway lines based on our science. Audubon and our conservation colleagues over the last 100 years have been studying bird migration, breeding habitats, overwintering, and stopover habitats. So we have a good understanding for where birds migrate, and that's where we designate the Atlantic flyway from the Mississippi flyway, for example, which is that one just over to our west. However, birds don't know how to read maps, and sometimes they will cross flyways. That does happen on occasion. Occasionally, we will see an American white pelican over here in the Montezuma Wetlands complex. They're typically found in the Central and Mississippi flyway, and vice versa. Some of our Atlantic flyway birds head just a little bit further west on occasion. But generally, the birds do stick to their flyways, and that is something that they have been doing for eons.
And also this year we've had an exceptionally calm Atlantic hurricane season, so we're probably not seeing those accidentals, the European birds that get blown over in the storm winds.
And we have also not been seeing the more southern bird species. You remember last year when I was in here and talking about the roseate spoonbill and wood stork, which two species typically found along the Gulf Coast states. We believe what happened is they got caught up in a tropical wind as the storm moved up from the Gulf Coast, and those were juvenile birds. They weren't tied down to any particular breeding habitat, so they flew north with the tropical system and found the Montezuma Wetlands complex, where they stayed for a couple of months. We haven't seen that quite yet, but the tropical season is still upon us, so there is always a chance that we could see some unusual birds visit the Finger Lakes region.
Our species spotlight for this month is the greater yellowlegs. Tell us about this long-legged, sharp-billed wading bird.
Yeah, this is one of our most common shorebirds, and one of those species that is starting to migrate through the Montezuma Wetlands complex right now. It's about 14 inches long, has a bill, it's about 3 inches long, and it's slightly up-curved. And it does have bright yellow long legs, which distinguishes it from other shorebird species. it can typically be found in shallower water. So those areas where either the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or New York State DEC has lowered water levels or is just naturally drying up because of our drier conditions, you can typically find it there feeding on aquatic insects, crustaceans, maybe even some smaller fish and minnows. Sometimes it will turn its head back and forth as it's wading through the water to stir up some of the food that it will be eating. We'll see flocks of them. Flocks in a dozen to 2 or 3 dozen yellowlegs, and sometimes the greater yellowlegs will mix in with the lesser yellowlegs, which is a very similar looking bird, just a little bit smaller as the name suggests. There's some unique barring on the greater yellowlegs. It does have some dense barring on the chest as well as up on the neck. The wings in the back are fairly dark colored, maybe with some speckled white. And great time to start to look for the shorebirds as they're migrating south. The shorebirds are a challenging suite of birds to identify. I got to say, they're really a challenge for me even. So I am constantly out there with my field guides, with my binoculars, and even a spotting scope is very helpful because some cases the marshes and the birds themselves are a little bit further away from me. So when you have the adults coming through, they may be in breeding plumage, may be in non-breeding plumage, plus the juvenile birds, which will be coming through a little bit later on during fall migration. They're not in breeding plumage. A lot of times they look fairly similar to other species. Challenging time of year, but that's what makes it fun and exciting.
Great opportunity to see lots of species. September 9th and 10th is the muck race. It's a fundraiser for the Friends of the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. I know you do that with your family. It's a 24-hour birdathon where you just go out and stake out your spots and see, I don't know, what's the record, 100 and something or 200 species? Or
nearly 200 species during the Montezuma Muck Race, which is that 24-hour birdathon competition coming up here in just over a month's time. We have so many opportunities for people of all experience levels to participate. Everything from the recreational category to a low carbon team, which is generally you bike or you hike or you paddle around the Montezuma Wetlands Complex in search of as many birds as you can during that 24-hour period. We also have a photo competition and a competitive competition. Interestingly enough, we're also engaged with the colleges here in the Finger Lakes region, so we have this collegiate category and trying to inspire our younger birders to participate as well. It's a fun, friendly competition. It's really a fundraiser for the Friends of the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. Each year we raise about $12,000 for the Friends, and that money goes right back into habitat restoration and environmental education programs, not only at Montezuma Audubon Center, but across the Finger Lakes region.
what are a couple of the real rarities over the years spotted at the muck race?
I think the rarest one I can remember in my 12 years was the brown booby. And this is a bird, again, like roseate spoonbill and wood stork, was probably blown up the Atlantic Flyway in one of those tropical systems in August or early September. And typically it's found down in the Yucatan Peninsula along the Gulf Coast. So that bird was with us for about a month, and it was found primarily over on Cayuga Lake. It was on one of the buoys, as I recall it, up here at the north end near Seneca Falls. A bird that we haven't seen since, but a true rarity and a spectacular sight for sure.
And to me, that's the real fun of it. I mean, I'm not an advanced birder by any means. I don't have a life list of hundreds and hundreds, but you never know when you'll see something that's new to you.
That's right, and the Montezuma Muck Race is a great way to explore the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, get more familiar with it. More experienced birders who may have a fancy spotting scope or binoculars will help family teams or less experienced teams find a bird hunkered down in the marsh habitat or a bird that's way up high in the canopy. It's all about community at Montezuma. And this Montezuma Muck Race coming up September 9th and 10th, 24-hour period here is a great way to explore and have fun and get involved in the habitat restoration and conservation of Montezuma. Now, you don't have to bird all 24 hours. I will say that. In fact, there are very few teams that do bird 24 hours, but my family and I typically participate, and even when we're sleeping in our sleeping bags in the tent outside Montezuma Audubon Center, we're still birding, because usually we hear those barred owls and great horned owls and eastern screech at about 3 o'clock in the morning, hooting away or whinnying away, as the case may be, and we count those birds as well.
Tell us about the opportunities to paddle our kayak or canoe on the canal this month.
So on the canals is still going on. This is a partnership between Montezuma Audubon Center and our New York State Canal Corporation. These are free guided kayaking excursions leaving from the Rivers Crossing Campground and Marina, right on Route 89 on the south side of Savannah. And we get into the Clyde River, which is also the Erie Canal, and go on a 2-mile 2-hour paddle. This is tranquil water, great for introductory paddlers or inexperienced paddlers, as well as experienced paddlers. We've been enjoying so many different birds along that stretch of the Clyde River. Bald eagles have pretty much been a daily sight for us. Osprey are very common. We've seen them capture fish out of the Clyde River. Green heron, great blue heron, the belted kingfisher is another species that we've been enjoying a lot of. Cerulean warbler is still in the forest there adjacent to the Clyde River, and we're going right through the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge in that stretch. So great opportunities. These are free. We provide all of the gear, the solo kayaks, the life vests, and the paddles, and of course the environmental educator to lead these excursions. They take place every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, both at 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Now, all the July events filled up, and almost all the August excursions have filled up. However, we do have some availability as we get deeper into August. Towards the end of August, there are some slots still available. So folks can go to our website, montezuma.audubon.org, to register. They can click on our Programs and Events button and see the entire list of excursions. Another one I mentioned briefly here is our Onondaga Lake paddling excursion coming up here on August 10th. We just finalized the details on that. So 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., a sunset paddle over at Onondaga Lake to highlight the 9-mile creek corridor, which is one of the main tributaries of Onondaga Lake, and then we're going to paddle along the western shoreline of Onondaga Lake to enjoy the waterfowl, the shorebirds migrating through, bald eagles that are there, and songbirds as well. So again, folks can go to our website for information on that one as well.
And if you're not a paddler and you just want to ride and see the birds, there's your partnership with Sam Patch Boat Tours. One's coming up this Friday, actually two coming up Friday, 9:30, 11:30, and then two more on the 26th.
Yeah, great partnership again with Cornhill Navigation over in Pittsford, New York, just outside of Rochester. We've been enjoying 24 to 36 different bird species along the Erie Canal just outside of Pittsford. A unique situation because it's a fairly urbanized area right there in the village of Pittsford. However, the land, the habitats adjacent to the canal is forested, and there are some wonderful parks. The town of Pittsford has done a great job of maintaining and restoring some of the parkland there. So the forested habitats and the wetlands there provide habitat for shorebirds as well as songbirds, and we've even seen some birds of prey. The new one for me was the Cooper's hawk, which we hadn't seen yet along that stretch of the canal, right there in the village of Pittsford. So you never know what you're going to see, and as we get deeper into migration here, there's going to be opportunities for more of those northern birds heading south, and you never know when those southern birds are going to get blown up here.
Coming up on Friday, August 26th, biologist Christina Ho will talk about the bats of New York. And we see bats around. It never occurred to me what kinds of bats, how many varieties do we have in New York or around the Finger Lakes?
Almost a dozen different species of bats around here. And Christina Ho is an amazing biologist for New York State DEC. She's a great partner, as all the DEC staff are. And so Friday, August 26th, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., Christina is going to highlight the bats that we have around the Montezuma Wetlands Complex with an indoor presentation first. And then following that, we're going to take folks out for a short walk at Montezuma Audubon Center and Christina is going to utilize some of the tools, some of the supplies that she uses in order to identify bats in the wild. And we do have some interesting species of bats, so people are going to get to see the equipment, utilize the equipment, learn how to identify bats by their clicking, their echolocation that they utilize. So coming up here at the end of the month here, folks can go to our website to register for this event. Great family activity on a Friday evening. Again, montezuma.audubon.org for that.
I think when a lot of people think of bats, they think of rabies. Are they actually big carriers, or is that kind of a myth that's developed over the years?
Well, that can happen alongside raccoons. But the bats, and the reason why we're highlighting this is that the Montezuma Wetlands Complex with the 50,000 acres of habitat just provides so much habitat for birds and other wildlife. And our bat species in particular are in still decline. And that is in large part due to the white nose syndrome, which has been going around New York State now for a couple of decades here. This is a fungus that doesn't kill the bats, but the fungus makes the bats itch when they're in their hibernacula, overwintering, largely in caves, sometimes in hollowed out trees, and that itching keeps the bats awake and not in a hibernation state, so they are using the fat reserves more during the winter months, and if they utilize all their fat reserves, their resources, then they may succumb to that itching caused by white nose syndrome. So really unique look at bats here in New York coming up at Montezuma Audubon Center.
ny.audubon.org is the state website. You can Google Montezuma or go to that site, click the Montezuma link for these and other programs. Chris Lajewski, Montezuma Audubon Center, thanks for the education and the talk as always. Always enjoy it.
It's always a pleasure, Ted. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Coming up later on this week, we're recording a couple of podcasts. Tomorrow, Lee Humphreys from Cornell University on the Internet of Things. We'll talk with Melody Smith-Johnson, who's opened up a new co-work space in the city of Auburn, and our weekly visit with Auburn City Clerk Chuck Mason coming up on Friday. Intern Caleb is our producer today, rocking his Toronto Blue Jays gear after they hung 28 on my Red Sox recently. Thanks for watching.